Okay, so we've talked about joysticks so that you can get values from driver input. The next thing we're going to look at is motors. Right? Now, a motor is a type of actuator. What is an actuator? It is a thing that does something. So you can put all kinds of stuff on your robot, but if it doesn't cause motion or something to move, it's not actuating, right? It'll either move something linearly, forward and back, or it'll move something rotationally. A motor is an example of a rotational actuator, which means it's going to spin. So here's the thing about programming, though. In programming, you don't know anything about a motor. Motors, for all practical purposes for you, are dumb devices. So instead of working with motors, we work with motor controllers. Well, what does a motor controller do? Obviously, they control motors. It's an easy solution there. The way I like to think about motor controllers is like a floodgate, right? You've got your motor, you've got this other device, and they're connected to each other. And then you've got, let's say, the battery. And the battery is connected to the motor controller. So you've got all this energy flowing from the battery to the motor controller. But maybe you don't want the motor to go. And so what the motor controller is doing is it's acting kind of like a floodgate for that power. It's letting the amount through that you want. If you don't want the motor to move, it's going to let almost no power through. If you want the motor to move really, really fast, it's going to let a lot of power through. So when you program the motor controller. And then the motor controller tells the motor what to do. And if you've done your code well, the motor controller will tell the motor to do, and the motor will do what you want it to do. If you haven't programmed it well, the motor's going to do whatever it thinks you want it to do because it can only do what the motor controller tells it to do. In FRC, there are several approved motor controllers, but we only have a couple of different kinds we work with. One we have is called the SparkMax, and it is used to control 3 different kinds of motor that you might see. It'll control SEM motors, which are older, big, bulky motors. We rarely use those, if ever. They control NEO motors. They control NEO 550 motors. And another motor they control that we don't really have a lot of, but we could if we wanted, are the NEO Vortex motors. So if you're working with any of these motors, you're going to be working with a SparkMax. SparkMax looks like this. 2 wires to get power from the battery, 3 wires to go to the motor. Why does the motor need 3 wires? Some motors need 3 wires. We'll talk about that when we talk more about the control system. There's also a port here to plug an encoder in. We'll talk more about encoders later as well. But if you're working with any of these 4 kinds of motor, probably going to use a SparkMax. Now, the other motor controller that we only have one of right now, really, but we're going to get more in the very near future, is, nope, wrong, there we go, called the Talon FX. And the Talon FX is a little bit different. It is what is called an integrated motor controller, which means you can't use it with any motor. You can only use it with motors that it's already attached to. This is what a Talon FX looks like. This is a whole motor. See this line kind of going around the edge? Everything on this side of the line is the motor controller. So it's a very, very tiny device. Most of this device is just the motor itself. There's 2 kinds of motors that you'll see the Talon FX on. One is the Falcon 500 motor controller. The Falcon 500 motor. And when I say you'll see it, you won't see it on our robots because this motor is not made anymore. It is still legal, so teams will have them, but they don't make it anymore. The other kinds of motor you'll see are on the, Kraken X60, which this is a Kraken X60, And more recently, you'll also see them on the Kraken X44. We have one Kraken X60, it's this one, and we're going to have more Kraken X60s. So don't expect to see a Kraken X44 on ours anytime soon. But these are the two kinds of motor controller that you'll expect to see most often. Any questions about those two? There are others. They just made a few more motor controllers legal for the 2025 season. We might get some if they're useful to us.